The hospital television glowed in the darkened room as Everett adjusted his tie on screen. With sincere regret, we announce that Marin will be stepping down from her position to focus on her health recovery. His voice carried a practiced, somber tone that never reached his eyes. Next to him, Odette nodded with performative sadness, her hand unconsciously touching the silver bracelet on her wrist, my grandmother's antique silver bangle that I'd kept in my locked drawer for 13 years, worn only during our most significant auctions. My heart rate monitor beeped faster. That bracelet had been in my drawer the morning I collapsed. 3 days ago, while previewing the Havenworth collection, the most significant private art assemblage to hit the market in decades. I'd spent 11 years building our rare acquisitions division, traveling across 3 continents to personally authenticate every piece in this collection. We're fortunate that Odette has worked alongside Marin for years. Everett continued, placing his hand on her shoulder. She understands the authentication protocols and will ensure a seamless transition as our new head of acquisitions. I gripped the remote with trembling fingers, my knuckles white. Lies. Authentication isn't something you absorb through proximity. It's thousands of hours studying brushstrokes, pigment aging, canvas textures, the subtle reactions of materials to ultraviolet light, things I'd never fully shared with Odette or anyone. The news segment cut to clips of Odette walking confidently through our preview gallery. That was filmed today, wearing my role like she'd been born to it. The upcoming Havenworth auction will proceed as scheduled, she announced to the camera, gesturing toward the Renaissance portraits I'd spent months authenticating. Marin laid excellent groundwork, and we're moving forward with her vision. My vision. 5 pieces in that collection had raised red flags during my final examinations. Subtle inconsistencies in the Van Eyck that no one else would catch. A questionable signature on the Botticelli study. The slightly wrong chemical composition in the green pigment of the Dürer landscape. Issues I'd planned to resolve before publishing the final catalog. Information I kept in my head, not written anywhere. A text message illuminated my phone. Congratulations on your retirement. The board approved the transition this morning. Take care of yourself. Everett. I hadn't submitted any retirement. There had been no discussion, no transition plan. The nurse entered, checking my IV drip. Your heart rate's elevated. Everything okay? Just work stress. Exactly what put you here, she replied, adjusting something on my monitor. Severe exhaustion, dangerously high cortisol levels, and that minor cardiac event. Your body can't take this kind of stress anymore. After she left, I pressed my emergency call button. 20 minutes later, my doctor stood at my bedside. I need to leave, I said. Absolutely not. You've had a cardiac event, your blood work is concerning, and what happens if I check myself out? She sighed. I strongly advise against it, but legally, you can sign an AMA form, against medical advice. Get me the form. Marin, you need to rest. Whatever's happening at work, they're auctioning forgeries, I whispered. They don't know it yet, but they will. And when those pieces sell to our top collectors, I didn't finish the sentence. The doctor studied my face. Is this worth dying over? It's worth living for. I spent that night making plans. The Havenworth auction was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. The catalog was already photographed and being printed, but I knew which pieces needed additional verification. Pieces that, if sold as authentic, would destroy our reputation and devastate collectors who trusted us. In the morning, I disconnected my heart monitor carefully, avoiding the alarm. I called my older sister B, the only person I fully trusted. I need your help, I said when she answered. And your guest cottage. What's happened? The concern in her voice was immediate. A coup while I was unconscious. B arrived within the hour with clothes in her car. I signed the AMA forms while the doctor watched disapprovingly, and we left through the service entrance to avoid anyone who might recognize me. B's lakeside cottage was 30 miles from the city, secluded and peaceful. As she helped me settle in, I explained everything. You need to call a lawyer, she said, her face tight with anger. Not yet. First, I need to make some calls. Over the next 3 days, I reached out to contacts across the art world, not to expose what was happening, but to ensure they would watch the auction with scrutiny. The Havenworth collection has some interesting pieces, I said carefully. Pay special attention to the Northern Renaissance works and the Italian studies. On the 4th day, my former employer announced my official resignation due to health reasons. They released a statement thanking me for my 11 years of service and expressing full confidence in Odette's leadership. Before I continue any further with this story that's going to reveal corporate betrayal at its most calculated, I want to sincerely thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this account of what happened to me, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means absolutely everything. And trust me when I say, the vindication that's coming is something you won't want to miss. The comments section is also where I'll be answering questions about the art world and how I ultimately handled this situation. My name is Maren Lansky. Before my world imploded, I was considered one of the top 5 art authentication experts in North America. I built my reputation through an obsessive attention to detail that bordered on the pathological, while others relied increasingly on technical analysis. I maintained that the human eye, properly trained, could detect inconsistencies that machines missed. I grew up surrounded by art. My mother restored paintings for a small museum, and I spent my childhood watching her work, learning how masters constructed their pieces layer by layer. By 16, I could spot a fraudulent signature by the hesitation in the brushwork. By 25, I'd written 2 definitive papers on pigment aging patterns in 17th century Dutch works. Odette joined my team 5 years ago. Ambitious, quick learning, always eager to stand beside me during examinations. I liked her initially. Her enthusiasm reminded me of my younger self. She asked intelligent questions and remembered everything I said. I began bringing her to important authentication sessions, explaining my reasoning as we examined pieces together. What I didn't realize was that she was cataloging my methods without understanding the deeper intuition behind them. She was learning to mimic my conclusions without grasping the underlying principles. Everett hired me 11 years ago to build the acquisitions division from nothing. We succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, growing from handling $10 million in annual auctions to over $200 million. Last year, we secured the exclusive rights to auction the Havenworth collection, valued conservatively at $400 million, largely because of my reputation. I'd spent 6 months traveling to verify each piece, working 18-hour days, skipping weekends, sleeping on planes. The preview exhibition was my crowning achievement, until I collapsed in Gallery 3, right in front of the Botticelli study I'd been concerned about. Acute exhaustion, the doctor said later. Your body is shutting down from stress. Tests revealed concerning cardiac irregularities. Not a full heart attack, but a warning shot. I was supposed to rest for 3 weeks. I lasted 7 days before discovering they'd erased me. By day 10, at Bee's cottage, I had regained enough strength to sit for hours at her kitchen table, making notes and planning. The auction was 4 days away. What happens if they sell forgeries? Bee asked, setting a cup of tea beside me. Lawsuits, reputation damage, stock collapse, I replied. The company has survived for 126 years on trust. Once collectors believe we can't authenticate properly, everything falls apart. And that helps you how? I looked up at my sister. This isn't about revenge. It's about preserving what I built. Is it? She challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're watching a train wreck in slow motion with no intention of stopping it. Her words stung because they contained truth. Part of me wanted to watch them fail without me, to prove my value through their catastrophic error. I tried warning them, I said quietly. I called Everett yesterday and told him there were pieces that needed final verification. He said Odette had already completed all outstanding examinations. And she doesn't know what to look for. She doesn't have the training to spot the inconsistencies in these particular works. So, call the board directly. I shook my head. Everett would claim I'm being vindictive, that I'm trying to undermine Odette because I'm bitter about being replaced. Aren't you? Of course I am. My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. 11 years building something extraordinary, and they discarded me the moment I showed weakness. Bee pulled out a chair and sat across from me. Then, what's your actual plan here? I stared at my notes, at the list of questionable pieces and their specific issues, at the names of collectors who would likely bid on them. The auction happens, I said finally. The pieces sell. The truth emerges naturally when new owners have their purchases examined by other experts. The company faces consequences. And then what? And then I decide whether to salvage what's left or watch it burn. The morning of the auction, I felt strangely calm. I watched the live stream from Bee's cottage, noting which collectors purchased which pieces. The 5 questionable works sold for a combined $78 million. I recognized most of the buyers, serious collectors with their own authentication resources. It took exactly 16 days for the first scandal to erupt. Konrad Reisman, one of the most respected collectors in Europe, was the first to discover the truth. He'd purchased the questionable Van Eyck for $22 million and, as was his custom, had it examined by his personal authentication team before adding it to his collection. His irate call to our auction house sent shockwaves through the industry. "This is categorically not authentic," he thundered during the emergency board meeting that was broadcast via conference call to all department heads. I listened in through a former colleague's secret phone connection. "The underpainting techniques are wrong. The aging patterns in the varnish are inconsistent. This is a sophisticated modern forgery." Within hours, 2 additional collectors came forward with similar claims. The Botticelli study I'd been concerned about was determined to have a forged signature. The Dürer landscape showed pigments that didn't exist until the 1800s. The company's stock plummeted 43% in a single trading day. Online art publications ran headlines questioning our authentication protocols. Clients began withdrawing consignments for upcoming auctions. 11 years of meticulous reputation building collapsed in hours. The day after the scandal broke, I received a call from Henrik, the board chairman, on my personal number. "Maren, we need to speak with you urgently." His voice carried none of its usual confidence. "I'm recovering from a health crisis, Henrik. Doctor's orders to avoid stress. This is about the Havenworth authentication issues. We need your expertise." I allowed a long pause. "You mean the expertise you decided to replace with Odette's?" He cleared his throat. "There's been a misunderstanding about your departure." "Has there? Because the last time I checked, being unconscious in a hospital bed isn't the same as submitting a resignation letter. Everett may have accelerated the transition inappropriately. The board had no knowledge. Interesting, because I have the press release announcing my retirement, approved by the board." Another uncomfortable pause. "We need your help, Maren. The situation is critical." "I imagine it is. 5 forgeries sold to your top clients tends to create problems. Can we meet tomorrow morning?" I thought of Everett and Odette, likely panicking as their careers imploded. Of my authentication team, now facing scrutiny for failures that weren't their fault. Of 11 years building something only to watch it crumble. "The Willowbrook Inn, private dining room, 10 a.m., I said finally. After hanging up, B watched me carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "No," I admitted. "But I've had 16 days to prepare." They've had 16 hours. That night, I called 3 of the affected collectors, people I'd built relationships with over decades. When I explained what had happened, their anger shifted from the company to Everett and Odette specifically. "We trusted your authentication, Maren," said Eliza Barden, who had purchased the forged Botticelli. "Not the institutions. Yours. Will you come to the meeting tomorrow?" I asked each of them. All 3 agreed immediately. I arrived at the Willowbrook Inn 20 minutes early, wearing my most conservative suit, hair pulled back severely, face carefully made up to hide my lingering exhaustion. The private dining room overlooked a small garden where spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. Henrik arrived 5 minutes later, looking haggard, alongside 2 board members I recognized. The shock on their faces when they saw Eliza Barden, Konrad Reisman, and Wei Ling already seated at the table was precisely what I'd hoped for. "What is this?" Henrik asked, stopping abruptly. "These are the people who purchased forgeries from your auction," I said calmly. I thought they should be part of our conversation. The board members exchanged glances. They had clearly expected to find me desperate and willing to help clean up their mess. Instead, they found me composed and flanked by 3 of the most influential collectors in the world. "Please, sit," I gestured to the empty chairs. For the next 40 minutes, I explained exactly what had happened, how I'd identified the questionable pieces but hadn't completed final verifications before my collapse, how my notes were mental, not written, as was my standard practice for final authentication, how Odette had claimed expertise she didn't possess. These forgeries would never have reached the auction block under my supervision, I concluded. The question now is what you plan to do about it. Henrik shifted uncomfortably. "We've initiated refunds for the affected pieces." "That's the bare minimum legal requirement," Konrad interrupted. "What about your authentication protocols going forward?" "We're reviewing our procedures." "With whom?" Wei Ling asked sharply. "The same people who let this happen?" The tension in the room was thick enough to touch. Henrik's phone buzzed repeatedly, but he ignored it, maintaining eye contact with me. "What do you suggest, Marin?" he finally asked. Before I could answer, the door opened. Everett strode in, his usual confidence visibly shaken when he saw the group assembled. "You weren't invited to this meeting," Henrik said coldly. "I'm the director of acquisitions. This falls under my—" "Sit down, Everett," I said quietly. To my mild surprise, he did. His eyes darted between me and the collectors, calculating his position. "Were you aware of Marin's concerns about these pieces?" Eliza asked him directly. "She left no notes indicating—" "That wasn't my question," Eliza cut in. "Did she express concerns about these pieces before her hospitalization?" Everett hesitated too long. "We discussed several pieces that needed additional examination, and yet you allowed the auction to proceed without completing those examinations," Conrad stated. "Odette assured me she had addressed all outstanding concerns," Everett replied, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his voice. "The same Odette who had never authenticated a major piece independently?" I asked. The room fell silent. Henrik finally broke it. "What will it take to fix this, Marin?" I'd been waiting for this question. "I'll return under 3 conditions. First, I take over as division head, with expanded authority. Second, Everett and Odette remain employed, reporting directly to me. Third, I personally handle all communication with affected clients." "You want to keep them?" Henrik couldn't hide his surprise. "I do." I didn't explain further, but I saw understanding dawn in Eliza's eyes. She'd known me long enough to recognize that this wasn't mercy. Henrik didn't hesitate. "Done. When can you start?" "Tomorrow. I'll need access to all documentation regarding the questioned pieces immediately." As the meeting concluded, Everett approached me. "Marin, I want you to know I never intended." "Save it," I said quietly. "You have a 9 a.m. meeting with me tomorrow. Bring Odette." That night, I couldn't sleep. The adrenaline of confrontation had worn off, leaving me drained but satisfied. B made us tea while I recounted the meeting. "You're going to work with them?" she asked. "After what they did?" "With them, but not for them," I clarified. "There's a difference. It sounds like revenge with extra steps." I smiled slightly. "The best revenge isn't impulsive. It's patient. And what exactly are you planning to do with them?" I stirred my tea thoughtfully. "Give them exactly what they deserve." The next morning, I arrived at the office at 8:30. The security guard did a double take when he saw me. "Miss Lansky, we weren't told you'd be returning." "Surprise," I said mildly, swiping my still active badge. My office, now Odette's office, was unlocked. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the changes. My reference books had been rearranged, my authentication tools reorganized. The silver bracelet sat on the desk beside a half-empty coffee cup. I sat in my chair and waited. At 8:55, Odette walked in, freezing when she saw me. The color drained from her face. "Marin." I didn't. "They didn't tell me. That I'd be in my office?" I asked pleasantly. "Interesting." Her eyes flickered to the bracelet on the desk. She instinctively touched her now bare wrist. "That's actually mine," I said, following her gaze. "Family heirloom. Quite sentimental." She blushed deep red. "I'm so sorry. I found it in the drawer and thought that I wouldn't be coming back for it." Understandable assumption. I stood up. The board meeting room is already set up. Everett should be waiting. Walking through the office was surreal. Employees stopped mid-conversation, staring openly as I passed. Some looked embarrassed, others relieved. News traveled fast. In the boardroom, Everett sat alone, reviewing documents. He stood when we entered. "Marin, I've prepared a full summary of the situation and potential remediation steps." "Thoughtful," I said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "But first, let's discuss your new roles." For the next hour, I outlined their responsibilities under the restructuring. Neither would authenticate anything independently. Both would handle direct communication with all affected collectors, personally delivering refunds and apologies. They would attend remedial authentication training under my supervision. "This feels punitive," Everett finally objected. "It's not punishment," I replied calmly. "It's accountability. You both claimed expertise you didn't possess. Now you'll have the opportunity to actually develop it, under very public scrutiny." Odette's eyes filled with tears. "The collectors will never take us seriously again." "That's certainly a possibility," I agreed. "Actions have consequences." As they left, clearly shaken, Henrik entered with the remaining board members. You didn't fire them, he observed. No, that would be too quick. I gathered my notes. They'll each have the chance to prove their value or confirm their incompetence every single day in front of the very people they deceived. Henrik studied me with new understanding. This isn't just about fixing the authentication issues, is it? I met his gaze steadily. I'm solving multiple problems simultaneously. Isn't that why you hired me? That afternoon, I sent an email to all clients involved with the Havenworth auction, personally signing my name to the authentication failure and outlining our remediation process. The response was immediate: relief that I was back, cautious optimism about restoring trust. What I didn't reveal to anyone was the evidence I'd been gathering during my recovery: the text messages, the premature retirement announcement, the deliberate removal of my authentication protocols, or the much larger issue I'd discovered while reviewing the company's financial records during my first day back. The next 8 weeks unfolded like a slow-burn psychological thriller. Everett and Odette reported directly to me, sitting through grueling meetings with disappointed collectors and enduring remedial authentication training that exposed their limitations daily. I assigned Everett to personally handle the refund for Conrad Riesman's forged Van Eyck, a particularly humiliating task given Conrad's reputation for ruthless questioning. Odette was tasked with creating a comprehensive presentation on the exact authentication failures that had allowed the forgeries to reach auction. She delivered it to the entire international team while I watched from the back row, noting every stumble and incorrect technical term. But beneath these visible consequences, I was working on something far more significant. Late one evening, while reviewing financial records from the past 18 months, I discovered unusual payment patterns, large consultancy fees to an entity named Aurora Advisors that appeared 3 days after major auctions. The amounts varied but averaged 4% of auction proceeds, substantial sums that seemed excessive for legitimate consulting work. When I tried accessing details about Aurora Advisors, I hit a permission barrier. "You don't have clearance for those records," explained Denise from accounting when I called her. "Only Everett and the CFO can access that vendor's complete profile." "That's interesting," I said, "considering I sign off on all authentication consulting expenses. This isn't categorized under authentication. It's under strategic advisory services." I thanked her and hung up, my suspicions deepening. That night, I called Henrik at home. "I need complete access to all financial records," I said, without preamble. "That's not typically given to division heads," he replied carefully. "I'm not a typical division head, and these aren't typical circumstances." His hesitation was brief but noticeable. "I'll have IT adjust your permissions in the morning." With expanded access, the picture became clearer. Aurora Advisors had received over $14 million in the past 2 years. Their invoices were vague: strategic collection assessment and market positioning guidance. No deliverables were ever attached. I searched business registries for Aurora Advisors and found it had been incorporated in the Cayman Islands 18 months ago. The listed directors included a name I didn't recognize: Vivian Mercier. The next morning, I casually asked Odette about her family during our daily review meeting. "Your mother's name is Vivian, right?" I said between authentication discussions. The slight widening of her eyes told me everything. "Yes. How did you know that?" "I believe we met at the holiday party years ago. Vivian Mercier, correct?" Her face paled slightly. "Yes, that's right." Later that day, I requested a private meeting with Henrik and 2 board members I trusted. In the small conference room, I laid out what I'd found so far. Aurora Advisors appears to be receiving substantial consulting fees with no clear deliverables, I explained. The company was incorporated 18 months ago in the Cayman Islands, and I have reason to believe it's connected to Odette through her mother. Henrik's expression hardened. "That's a serious allegation." "It's not an allegation yet," I clarified. "It's an observation that warrants investigation." "What exactly are you suggesting?" asked Veronica, the most senior board member. "I'm suggesting we bring in an independent auditor to examine these payments." Quietly, they agreed, though Henrik seemed reluctant. I chose the auditing firm personally, a boutique operation known for discretion and thoroughness. Within 3 weeks, they delivered their preliminary findings. Aurora Advisors was indeed owned by Vivian Mercier, Odette's mother. The company had no employees, no office, and no apparent expertise in art or auctions. The millions flowing into its accounts were largely moved offshore immediately after receipt. But the true revelation came from examining the timing of the payments against our auction records. Every major payment to Aurora coincided precisely with auctions featuring pieces authenticated by Everett personally, pieces that bypassed my team's usual protocols. He's been selling authentications, I said quietly when the auditor finished his presentation to the small group, authenticating questionable pieces in exchange for kickbacks. That's why he wanted you out, Veronica said, her voice tight with anger. You were the obstacle to his scheme, and Odette was his willing accomplice, I added. The perfect replacement, someone he could control. We need to contact authorities immediately, Henrik said, reaching for his phone. Not yet, I replied, placing my hand over his. I want to handle this my way. The board reluctantly agreed to let me proceed with my plan, with one condition, resolution, within 30 days. The next morning, I called Everett and Odette into my office separately. With each, I discussed routine matters before casually mentioning Aurora Advisors. That name has been appearing on our vendor payments, I said to Everett. Substantial amounts for consulting work I can't quite place. His practiced calm nearly held. Strategic advisory services, corporate-level initiative. Interesting, because the board has no recollection of approving such an arrangement. A slight tightening around his eyes. Henrik approved it personally. I see. Well, I'm conducting a routine vendor review. Nothing to worry about. With Odette, I took a different approach. Your mother has an interesting business background, I said, watching her carefully. She froze momentarily. My mother? Vivian. She's done quite well with her advisory firm, from what I understand. Odette's gaze dropped to her hands. I don't know much about her business. No? That's surprising. Since wire transfers from her company's account have gone directly into yours 6 times in the past year. Her head snapped up. You can't possibly know that? Financial investigations are thorough, Odette, and bank privacy isn't what it used to be. For the next 2 weeks, I watched them closely. They began having whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. Everett made 3 international calls from his office daily. Odette looked increasingly anxious. Then came the counterattack I'd been expecting. I arrived one morning to find Henrik waiting in my office, his expression grave. There's been a complaint filed against you, he said, without preamble. By whom? Everett and Odette. They're claiming you've created a hostile work environment, that you're targeting them vindictively because of what happened during your absence. I nodded calmly. And what does the board think? The board is concerned. Your return has stabilized client relationships, but these allegations could create new problems. I see. Have they provided any evidence of this harassment? They claim you've assigned them impossible tasks designed to humiliate them professionally, that you've made veiled threats regarding their futures. I smiled slightly. Interesting interpretation of accountability. This isn't a joke, Marin. They're threatening legal action. Let them, I replied. Discovery works both ways. The next day, I received a formal notice requesting my presence at a special board meeting to address the complaints. The date was set for exactly 1 week later. My 30-day window was closing fast. That evening, I called a contact at the National Financial Crimes Unit. I need some guidance, I said carefully, hypothetically speaking. I don't do hypotheticals, Marin. You know that. Fine. I've uncovered what appears to be a sophisticated fraud scheme involving authenticated art, money laundering through offshore consulting fees. How much money are we talking about? At least 14 million over 2 years. Possibly more. A low whistle. Send me what you have. No promises, but I'll look. 3 days before the special board meeting, I received an unexpected call from Wei Ling, one of the collectors who had purchased a forged piece. I've been approached about an unusual proposition, she said without preamble. What kind of proposition? Everett contacted me privately. He offered to personally replace my forged piece with an authentic work from his private collection, at no cost, if I would speak on his behalf at your upcoming board meeting. My pulse quickened. What did you tell him? That I would consider it. I thought you should know. Has he approached any other collectors with similar offers? Conrad received the same proposal. He was less diplomatic in his refusal. I thanked her and hung up, immediately calling the other affected collectors. 3 had received similar offers. All had been asked to testify that I had known about authentication issues before my collapse, but proceeded anyway due to pressure to meet auction deadlines. They were trying to flip the narrative, to make me the villain of this story. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a sense of foreboding. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark gray suit that projected seriousness without intimidation. As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, I received a text from my contact at the Financial Crimes Unit. Green light. Standing by, the boardroom was arranged like a tribunal. Henrik at the center, Everett and Odette to one side with their legal counsel, empty chairs for me, and my non-existent representation on the other. Before we begin, Henrik said as I took my seat, I want to be clear that this is not a formal hearing. We're simply addressing concerns that have been raised about the current working environment. Of course, I replied pleasantly, though I'm curious why outside counsel is present for an informal discussion. Everett's lawyer leaned forward. My clients have serious concerns about retaliatory behavior and the potential for financial harm to their careers. Interesting perspective, I said, opening my laptop. May I present some information relevant to this discussion? We're here to discuss your behavior, Marin, Everett cut in, not to review company operations. Oh, but the two are inseparable, I replied, connecting my laptop to the room's display system. My behavior has been directly motivated by what I discovered in company operations. The screen illuminated with the first slide, a flowchart showing payments from our auction house to Aurora Advisors, then to various offshore accounts, and finally to personal accounts belonging to Everett, Odette, and Vivian Mercier. What is this? Henrik demanded. This, I said calmly, is why Everett and Odette needed me gone. For the next 30 minutes, I presented the evidence I'd gathered. The suspicious authentication approvals, the precisely timed payments, the offshore money movements, the forged pieces that had somehow received Everett's personal authentication stamp despite clear problems. You've been selling authentications, I concluded, looking directly at Everett, approving questionable pieces in exchange for kickbacks, laundered through Odette's mother's shell company. The room fell silent. Everett's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. These are baseless accusations, Everett finally said, his voice strained. You've fabricated connections between unrelated business matters. Have I? I clicked to the final slide, a formal investigation notice from the National Financial Crimes Unit dated that morning. The authorities disagree. The doors opened, and 3 federal agents entered, accompanied by Veronica. Everett Klein and Odette Mercier, the lead agent said. We have some questions about Aurora Advisors and certain financial transactions. What followed was precisely the public humiliation they had tried to inflict on me. Everett and Odette were escorted from the building while employees watched from doorways and hallways. Their offices were sealed with evidence tape, their computers confiscated. In the aftermath, Henrik approached me, his expression a mix of admiration and wariness. You orchestrated this perfectly, he said quietly. No, I corrected him. They orchestrated it themselves. I simply waited for the right moment to expose it. 6 months later, the company had largely recovered. The scandal had been contained to Everett and Odette, who were now facing multiple federal charges. I had been formally appointed as Executive Director of Global Authentication, a new position with oversight of all authentication processes worldwide. On the anniversary of my hospital stay, I received a small package. Inside was my grandmother's silver bracelet and a note from Odette, written from the detention center where she awaited trial. I wanted to return what wasn't mine. It read, I'm sorry for everything. I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, feeling its familiar weight. Some might consider my revenge complete, but I knew better. True vindication wasn't in their punishment. It was in rebuilding what they had nearly destroyed, stronger and more resilient than before. The art world is built on trust, on expertise that takes decades to develop and seconds to question. When someone tries to shortcut that process, to fake the knowledge, to claim expertise they haven't earned, the entire foundation cracks. My revenge wasn't ruining their careers. It was preserving the integrity of something that mattered more than any individual success. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to thank you for listening. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't what we do to others, it's what we rebuild from the ashes of their betrayal. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced betrayal in your professional life? How did you handle it? Please like and subscribe for more stories about navigating the complex, often cutthroat world of high-level corporate dynamics. I'll be sharing more insights from my experiences in the weeks ahead, including what happened during the trial and how we transformed our authentication processes to prevent this from ever happening again.